So in the guide for the perplexed, Maimonides that does give us sources of the information or the sum of part of the knowledge he shares. Of course, he quotes the Bible a lot, but then he does also refer or mention other texts. In particular, he does mention texts written by Aristotle a lot. And then he does mention or quote another guy by the name Ankelos a lot. In fact, it seems like the idea of understanding the Bible as having using figurative language seems like he got it a lot from much of that understanding from Ankelos. He does also quote books that seems to have been written much earlier, maybe earlier than the Bible. It seems like it's the impression I got. Of course, I need to point out at the moment I'm reading Baruch Spinoza's book, Theologico Politico, and he made me realize that the Bible was not written like at a specific moment, like maybe a month or two. The Bible was written, in fact, he says, likely to within a period of 2,000 years. So it's a long period. Anyways, so Maimonides does mention these books, these texts. Some of them seem to have been written either earlier than the Bible or around the time the Bible was written. And one that he mentions that seemed like was written either at the time the Bible was being written or even earlier is a book titled The Nabatean Agriculture. Now, this is a book that was written by people known as the Sabaeans. Now, the Sabaeans, it tells us, lived in southern Yemen today and the Horn of Africa, that region, Ethiopia, Yemen, that region. And it tells us that Abraham came from this tribe. He was a member of this tribe. The previous video, I did tell you that Abraham rebelled and he was chased away by the king, and he left his tribe and he went and he lived his life. And you know what happened by reading the Bible, how his life turned out after that. So this book, The Nabatean Agriculture, seems like it was a voluminous book. Going by how Maimonides tells us, the things he tells us come from the book. The book is about agriculture, religion, gods, everything, day-to-day life. It could be taken, maybe it was like some sort of the Bible of the Sabaean people, something like that. But that's not the only book he tells us about that is an ancient text. He also mentions that there is a book titled Istimachis. He tells us that that book has been attributed to Aristotle, but he says it is not Aristotle who wrote it. It sounds like it was written by somebody else. He also tells us that there is a book on talisman, a book known as Tom Tom. He does mention it a few days. This book, the way he describes it, is a book that talks a lot about magic and witchcraft and such kind of content. And there's another book, a book by Al-Sarb. It's a book that talks about the stars, the constellations, and such things. There's another book he describes as a book by someone by the name Hermes, Hermes. And then there's a book of the Sabaean written by somebody called Ishak. And this book describes the religion of the Sabaean, customs, ceremonies, festivals, offerings, prayers, and everything relating to faith, as he puts it. And then he writes, all these books which I have mentioned are work on idolatry, translated into Arabic. There is no doubt that they form a very small portion in comparison to that which has not been translated, and that which is no longer existent, but has been lost in time, in the course of time. But those works which are at present existent include most of the opinions of the Sabaeans and their practices, which are to some degree still in vogue in the world. So what he says here, he says that these texts are just a small portion of all the ancient texts. And he says majority of the ancient text had been lost by the time he was living. That was like about 1,000 years ago. So most of those texts were lost. There are only a few of them still around, including the Nabatean Agriculture, which I don't think is still in existence today. I tried looking around. I did see people who were talking about it, but nobody has said that he knows of a copy being in existence. So yeah, so Maimonides says that most of these ancient texts had been lost. I continue to write. Now he tells us what this other paragraph is just talking about, the content of these books. So yeah, so Maimonides does point out or does alert us about the existence of very ancient texts, texts that were written before the Bible was written, it seems, texts that were written, because if we look at texts, for example, the texts that are from the Sabaeans were very active before the Bible was written. So their texts are much older than the Bible, and most texts we consider today to be very ancient. Yeah, so it does mention, alert us about this text, even though we might never get hold of these texts and read them for ourselves.